I want to talk about what's different about these cards, this Storyteller deck, why it's different to all of the other tips and tricks and techniques to help you come up with story ideas and to help you structure stories. Why it's different. It's actually so different that it's built on an entirely different theoretical foundation. So it is not dependent on the existing narrative theory that has existed for, well, what we know and what we use and what you'll find on YouTube is the structuralist narrative theory. That was built off of Aristotle's ideas, his basic fundamental ideas like plot, genre, tragedy, comedy, drama, etc. But the structuralist theory is what we have today. And this is fundamentally different from that set of ideas about how a story is made, what makes a story, and how one might go about creating a story, a compelling story. The philosophical difference is that this is not based on the structuralist philosophy, in which the idea of analysing a bunch of stories, finding the patterns and the structures, and finding the good bits, and then showing those to other people and say, make stories like that. That is the structuralist narrative theory. That's the philosophy of the structuralist narrative theory. The philosophy of this is a phenomenological narrative theory. Well, it's a phenomenological philosophy. So this would be a phenomenological narrative theory. And the idea of this is that rather than analysing a bunch of stories, which is what the structuralists did, which is what the hero's journey is a result of, and all of these other structures and techniques, rather than analysing a bunch of stories and finding the techniques and all of the patterns and the structures, what it does instead is it says, rather than analysing the stories, let's analyse human experience, particularly the really moving and the really universal human experiences. Let's see if we can find the patterns, and let's put them in a deck of cards for writers to draw inspiration from. The difference here is that the structuralist narrative theory, which is what you'll find elsewhere on YouTube and the internet and all of the structuralist narrative theory books out there, is when you rely on that theory, you're taking a top-down approach to storytelling. So what the structuralists did was they took a bunch of stories, a lot of them, a lot of myths, a lot of old folk tales, depending on who you ask or whose work you look at, and they analysed all of these stories and they found patterns. And you'll know Joseph Campbell. He's one of the ones who found patterns, and the pattern he found was the hero's journey. So you take all of the stories, all of the myths, you find the commonalities, all of the common events, and all of the general order of those events, and you put them, you kind of like compile them together into this one meta sort of story, and that's then packaged up and given to other writers and said, and then you say, make a story, fit it into those bits. So you start with the top, you start with the existing story structure, and you tell writers to fit ideas into that structure. Now, I don't like that, because when I want to write stories, I don't like to have this structure that I'm told I need to create ideas for. I have ideas already, and I want to help develop those ideas, and I want to find meaningful ideas, and then I want to organize it into a story. I mean, that's what we do in real life. We have these experiences in real life, particularly moving or powerful or crazy or mysterious experiences, and then we find a way to tell a story about it to someone in conversation, or we might depict it as an art piece or write it in a book or something like that. And I think that's a more organic way of coming up with stories rather than a top-down approach. This is a bottom-up approach. These are the snapshots of the meaningful, moving events and scenarios that you find in real life that are generally what people think about anyway. And when you think about scenes for stories, or even events for games in which you can tell a story to your friend about later on after you've played it, you have those experiences and then you go and mould it into a story to tell people about. And that's what these are. They're snapshots of human experiences. And the way that they work is, let me get an example. The way that these cards work is it's not prescriptive. It doesn't give you instructions on what to think about. It's not like that. That's a top-down approach. That's like the structuralist theory. It's not prescribing things for you to think about. What this is instead is it's reflective. So you will look at the card and you reflect upon it. And what this card is in particular, it's a moment when you see a side of someone that you didn't see before. And it's quite dark because when you see sides that people hid from you, they usually hide it because it's quite dark. And so this represents a person who you see, what an aspect of them where they're quite cold and quite heartless, quite unempathetic, like dead inside, like they don't feel anything, or they don't care really. They can see someone suffering or in pain and they're just numb, they're just cold inside. I'm sure you have had experiences like that in the past. And it's worded in a way as if it was a memory. So this is worded in a way that it says, as they watched the suffering, they didn't even flinch. They were just cold to the core. So it's like you're telling it as a memory. And what you would do is you would think, if this was applicable to my story, so if this was something that happened in my story, as described by the card, what would it be? So if in my story I saw someone watching someone else suffering and they didn't even flinch, they were just cold to the core, who would that be? Who would the character be doing that? What would they be doing? Where would they be? What would it look like if it was part of my story? Do you see what I mean? They're reflective. It gets you thinking. It's not prescriptive. And I think that this, like I say, this is a more organic way to think of stories. That is a brief explanation of how the cards work, why I felt the need to create them. And if anyone else thinks that they're useful, that they sound useful, go ahead and buy. Well, they're not ready to buy yet, but they will be at some point. This is just a prototype box. It's a bit scraggly. It's going to look all nice and clean when it's done. So anyway, see ya.